What's going on, everybody? New video here. For starters, it looks a million times better because I decided to finally buy some studio lights. So, we have a properly lit production going on here. So, today we're just going to be counting down my top 30 favorite films of all time. Thought this would be kind of a fun thing to do. And then I started doing it and I realized this is really hard. Um, so I've watched so many movies in the past couple weeks. I mean, holy shit. Now these aren't necessarily the most entertaining movies of all time. I think there's a difference between what you think are the best, what mean the most to you, and what are just the most entertaining. This is my opinion. This is not an official list in any way. This is not the AFI Top 100 or some voted in thing. This is my personal opinion. There are going to be movies on here that are really weird, and there's going to be movies that aren't on this list that a lot of people would probably instantly assume someone who went to film school would put in their, top 30. Another thing I need to point out is that for the most part, these are in no particular order, and I don't really think anybody cares about the particular order. What makes movie number 30 better than movie 28 or worse? I mean, the order doesn't really matter as much. It's more the fact that as of now, at this particular moment in time of recording this, these are my favorite movies. It could always change. I mean, movies are always getting shuffled around on this list, and it's very hard. There's a lot of honorable mentions, and we'll get to those at the end of everything. So let's get right into it. Number 30. Disaster Artist. Disaster Artist, I think, is this generation's Ed Wood. Ed Wood, the movie, directed by Tim Burton, not Ed Wood, the person. You get what I mean? They both have a similar premise of dealing with a director who has the passion for filmmaking, but not the talent for it. In a lot of ways, I can relate to that, and I think a lot of other amateur filmmakers can relate to that too, where just in your mind sometimes you just think like, am I good? Am I being an Ed Wood? Am I being a Tommy Wiseau? And in that way, it's just very relatable. Not only is it really a funny movie, though, and a very entertaining movie, it also has a lot of heart to it. It's not just, an over-the-top kind of goofy comedy. It is, like I said, very funny, but it does have heart to it. There is a nice message there. I'm aware that it doesn't follow the real-life events perfectly, but the story that it tells about friendship and following your dreams and all that kind of sappy stuff, it just hits the right chord with me. The performances are also great. James Franco is unrecognizable as Tommy Wiseau. Just fantastic from him. Dave Franco does a good job as well. He kind of just grounds the movie. He's the counterbalance to Tommy Wiseau's craziness. But ultimately, really, with this movie, it just makes me feel creative. It makes me want to get creative, start filming, start writing. And that's just something I can always appreciate in a film. And it's a very unique thing to this movie and movies like it. Number 29. Nightcrawler from 2014. Nightcrawler was a movie I had no real expectations for. I think I saw the trailer when the trailer initially dropped. Thought it kind of looked cool. Didn't look up any reviews or anything like that. And then I went and saw it, and I thought it was one of the best movies that had come out in recent years, and I still hold that opinion. I think what sells the movie for me the most is Jake Gyllenhaal's performance. It's just absolutely amazing what an unrecognized talent he is. How he wasn't nominated for an Oscar for this movie, I'll never know. I mean, the Oscars suck ass now anyways, but still, it's a very unrecognized performance here. He's just absolutely magnetic in this movie. Anytime he's on screen, you just can't take your eyes off him. He's just such a unique character. I mean, he's a total sociopath, but the uniqueness comes from the fact that you almost kind of find yourself admiring him in a way. Not in the sense that he's a sociopath, but in the sense that he's probably one of the most driven characters in film history. I mean, this guy puts in more effort into getting into this news business than like most people put into like their passions in life. I mean, it's kind of inspiring in a weird way. The film also just feels so relevant for today, with its commentary on the news world and the corruption and the bullshit that goes on in that industry. Commentary is pretty on the nose here, but I think that really does add to it. It wants to hit you over the face with it and kind of tell you to wake up a bit. And, you know, at the time when I saw this, it did kind of open my eyes to just how corrupt and evil some of these people are that work in that industry. I think it really does a good job with that. I mean, ultimately, it's just a really great thriller with solid performances, good cinematography, and good lighting, and everything really just going for it. It's just kind of a complete package of a modern thriller classic. I think it's really going to go down in history as one of the greats from this decade.
Number 28. Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I had to get Steven Spielberg somewhere on this list, but wow, it was really hard. Just so many choices from Jaws to Duel to E.T., Jurassic Park, you know, the list goes on. It was very hard to pick one. And though I think that those movies are probably the more entertaining, going back to that theme, I think Close Encounters just gets your mind racing with so many different ideas. It just asks better questions. It's just, I feel like the overall better put together film. Richard Dreyfuss gives an amazing performance throughout the entire movie as just a guy who has a close encounter with aliens and just becomes obsessed. I like the unraveling mystery aspect of it. Like, what the heck is this mountain that he keeps sculpting and tearing up his living room and all this? Like, what does it mean? And it's a nice through line to get you to the third act of the movie. I think it really works, keeps you intrigued. It's kind of a tragedy because, you know, he is a family man. You know, he has 2 kids, he has a wife, and this obsession is just ruining that aspect of his life. At the same time, you understand his fixation with the UFOs because it's a question that I think we all ask and we all want the answer to. And he's so close to figuring it out, and he knows what he saw, but obviously he now looks like a nutcase. The final act is also just incredible. It's hard to explain the emotion that it gives you, but it's just such a fulfilling feeling that you get from this finale when they finally make contact. It really is just Spielberg magic at its finest.
Number 27.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966. I think this film is just the embodiment of the grand epic. Typically, I'm not a huge fan of movies that are 3 hours plus. I just don't really think movies need to be that long, and typically upon rewatches it just seems to drag on. I'm looking at you, Endgame. With The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, this movie is just so entertaining and so enthralling that it really just does not feel like 3 hours has gone by the time you're done watching the movie. I think what I love most about this movie is all of the backstabbings and uneasy alliances going on. It just really makes for an exciting experience because you just don't know what's going to happen next. And finally, obviously you have to talk about the climax of the movie, the 3-way duel between the characters. It's one of the greatest scenes of all time, and I think a big part of that is just the build up to that scene. I mean, the entire movie is building up to that moment, and by the time you get there, you're just on the edge of your seat, just totally enveloped into what's going on because you've just invested 3 hours of your time into this movie, and now you're finally at that climactic finish. It's just absolutely magnificent.
Number 26.
Star Wars from 1977. It was definitely a toss-up between this and Empire. And though I do think that there's a lot of aspects of Empire that are better, the darker tone, the more character development, introduction to new characters like Yoda, I still give the edge to the original film. One of the reasons I love this movie is just how self-contained it is. Before the franchise got, milked into oblivion and became this, juggernaut of a franchise, there was the original. Watching it now, there's just a certain humbleness to it that really just can't be matched. It's just so innocent. They had no idea this was going to become what it became. With Empire, you watch it and you're like, well, now I've got to watch the next one. You can't just stop at Empire. It just feels the most classic and timeless to me, taking a lot of inspiration from old movie serials and films, a lot of samurai movies and Flash Gordon serials, stuff like that, and then doing something unique with it and making a nice twist on it. The acting isn't the best, but that's really not why you're watching it. You watch it for the creative worlds and classic story of good versus evil. It's another movie that's just really hard to really add any original thoughts to it. So that's really all I have to say about it. And I didn't want to cheat and just like put the whole trilogy on here because I think it's more fun to, say this is the one I enjoy more. So Star Wars. Number 25. The Fly from 1958. The Fly was another movie that surprised me. I didn't expect this level of quality from a monster movie from the 50s. Don't get me wrong, I love monster movies from the 50s, but I just didn't think it could be done in such an intelligent way. The core of this story is ultimately about man meddling with things that they just don't understand. And like The Thing, this movie is sadly overshadowed by the David Cronenberg remake from the 80s with Jeff Goldblum. And though that's a good movie as well, I think that this movie stands on its own a little bit better than that film does. The tension in this movie is done in such a great way. The fly mutant itself isn't even revealed until the final act of the movie. And the rest of the film is about the family trying to catch that goddamn fly. And it's so frustrating to watch because there's so many close calls where they have it or they had it and then released it, and it's insane and it's so frustrating, but that's what makes it so excellent, so much fun to watch. It also has a nice unraveling mystery. You start the film at the end of the movie and then kind of peel back the layers. So it kind of did that whole out of order storytelling thing before it was cliche. I know Citizen Kane did it as well, but nowadays you see that so often, but to see it from a movie from the 50s is kind of cool. It also has to be stated that the ending of this movie is one of the most brutal and horrific endings I've ever seen in my life. I mean, they really punished this motherfucker, but he didn't do anything wrong. It's so brutal. And then there's just a cut, and then it goes to this peaceful, happy time. It's a little out of left field, but it almost does add a charm to the movie, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This movie definitely just does not get the attention it deserves, and I think a lot of people just expect it to be a cheesy monster movie, but it's so much more than that. Number 24. Gremlins from 1984. A movie from my childhood that has just stuck with me through all these years. I love the animatronics, I love the sets, I love the music, I love the tone. Seriously, the subversion of expectations in this movie is just crazy. Even when I watched it recently this past year, it kind of took me off guard. You're watching this nice, pleasant little family film and the little cute, Mogwai, and you're like, oh, this is adorable. And then out of nowhere, the mom's putting gremlins in blenders and microwaves and they're exploding and there's guns and murder, and I was just, even now, and having seen it 15 times, it's still kind of takes you back. Whoa, this took a 180, but it totally works. I also just enjoyed looking at the film. It's beautifully shot and the sets are amazing. It just screams small town Christmas to me. The human characters are also likable. The chemistry between Billy and Kate is very charming. It's very cute. And that really helps a movie like this to have enjoyable human characters on top of the really fun animatronic monsters. A lot of times the monsters steal the show, but in this film, it's anchored by charming performances from both of the leads. Just an overall classic, fun family film that'll always, I'll watch it every year. Number 23, Frankenstein from 1931. When picking one Universal monster movie, there were a bunch that came to mind. Bride of Frankenstein and Invisible Man were the other two that I definitely thought of, which, funny enough, were both directed by James Whale, so I definitely think he had a monopoly on the best Universal monster movies. So it definitely came down to those three, but I think Frankenstein edges out just because of its iconic status as a film. I mean, talk about a movie that's been parodied and spoofed more times than you can count. It's definitely a movie that grows on you. It's a movie, it's from 1931, so it's film in its infancy. But for a movie that's coming up on 90 years old, it still holds up remarkably well. I mean, from iconic scenes like "It's alive" and Frankenstein throwing the girl in the water, it's just a movie that still, to this day, just has scenes that just like stick in your brain. Once you see them, you do not forget them. And Boris Karloff just gives a legendary performance as the monster. He took a role that could have been easily forgotten and made it his own. He is Frankenstein, and no matter how many movies they make, he'll always be Frankenstein. I know it's the monster, whatever. It's hard to talk about such an important film without just listing all of the iconic scenes, but I'm not really sure what else to add other than just saying it's a cinematic masterpiece. Number 22, First Blood from 1982. First Blood is a lot like another film we'll get to on this list, where the common moviegoer will just discredit it because of the silliness of the movies that come later in the franchise. With the other movies in the franchise just being kind of dumb action movies, it's hard to forget sometimes that First Blood is actually an incredibly powerful and subdued film. It first and foremost is a character study of John Rambo and the mistreatment of soldiers from Vietnam and the effects of PTSD on them. It's not a balls to the wall action movie, though there's action in the film. It's not the main focus. Something else I like about this movie is that Rambo isn't necessarily the good guy. I mean, granted, the sheriff, Teasel, really escalates the situation, but kind of like Troutman says later in the movie, that Rambo did push back and do fighting of his own. There's definitely some gray moral area here. You still root for Rambo, but he's not a perfect, like, good guy, stereotypical action hero. And I think that's something that really helps elevate the film. And then one last thing is Stallone gives a great performance here. A lot of people like to rag on the guy and say he can't act or anything like that, but I would dare you to watch this movie, and by the end of it, especially that ending monologue, look me in the eyes and tell me that guy can't act, because he absolutely kills it in this movie. It's a very strong performance from him, and probably, arguably, the best of his career, but we'll get to that. Number 21, The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. I think this film is one of the most classic films of the 1950s. True, the effects are kind of cheesy by today's standards, but I think that adds to the overall charm of the movie. The questions it asks about the universe and humanity, that sounded really weird. Let's try that again. I said that like an alien myself. The questions it asks about the universe and the commentary on humanity is still just as relevant now as it was back then. It can also come across as a bit preachy, but I think sometimes you just need that in a film. It doesn't take political sides or religious sides. It just makes the statement that if humanity doesn't get its shit together, we're screwed. I also love the line at the end of the film from Klaatu when he says, paraphrasing here, "We don't claim to be perfect, but we have a system and it works." I think one of the reasons I like that line is that it's saying that, like, what they have isn't unobtainable because they're not perfect. What they have, we can have too, but we have to work towards it. ultimately, it's just such a classic film, warts and all, including all the cheesy special effects and some of the preachiness. I also like the pacing of the film. It moves at like a perfect speed. There's not much build up to when Klaatu lands on Earth. It's pretty much right in the beginning, which I think adds a lot of like chaotic energy to the film, and you're just thrust right into it all, and I think that really adds a little bit of a realism to it all. Um, it's just pure classic sci-fi. I think it's like the definition of a science fiction film.